I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Today's episode, Sunflowers and Sacrifice. Home. Stefan Dimitriov never imagined he would truly miss it. He had grown up on this farm, surrounded by the sunflowers his family cultivated for their oil. But since moving to Sofia to work as an administrator for the Ministry of Defense of Bulgaria, he found that the hustle and bustle of city life could sometimes be overwhelming. This made him long for the tranquility and isolation of the family sunflower farm just outside of Koprivets, a rural village about 170 miles from the Bulgarian capital. The sweet aroma of his mother's gevrek, a type of ring-shaped bread, filled the small home as he sat with his father Ivan and little brother Petar, who had just turned 18. Petar had taken Stefan's departure hard. They had always been close, sharing secrets and dreams under the vast Bulgarian sky. Now, with Stefan away, Petar often felt the weight of the farm on his shoulders, longing for his brother's guidance and companionship. Their mother, Marie, had just ventured outside to feed the 4 chickens they kept in the back. The chickens provided the family with a steady supply of eggs. Stefan was eager to catch up on the happenings around the farm. The crops, the chickens, the everyday life that he had left behind. He wanted to hear about his family's life since he had gone, but all anyone wanted to talk about was the war. "I've heard rumor that we might enter the war. Is this true?" his father Ivan asked as he broke a piece of gevrek and handed it to Petar. "I'm not sure. There are many who are still upset that we lost southern Dobruja of Romania a few years ago. I think Germany and Austria are enticing us with the promise of reclaiming it to gain our support." "We never should have given it up in the first place," Ivan said bitterly. "That was a setback for our dream of a greater Bulgarian state. Do you know how many ethnic Bulgarians live throughout the Balkans? It should all be one state." Stefan had heard all of this before. Nationalism had spread all over Bulgaria, and apparently it had now reached his father. "How are the crops looking this season?" Petar perked up at the question. "They're not too bad, except for some reason we're getting a lot more blackbirds than usual." "Dmitri from the village believes the war has driven the blackbirds to us, seeking refuge from the devastation. I'm not sure if that's true," Ivan said, shaking his head, "but they're certainly plentiful this season." Stefan had heard that farmers throughout Europe, at least the ones distant from the fighting, were having more issues with birds and even gophers and mice as the animals migrated away from the tattered land. "Are you doing anything to try and—" Petar got excited. "Scare them off?" "Yes. We built a scarecrow, and sometimes I just go out to the field and beat on the wash basin. It's loud, and they don't like it." "At least you're doing something. I've heard some farmers are suffering pretty big losses," Stefan replied as he watched his mother walk in the door. "Stefan, there's a man here to see you." Marie had a strange look on her face. "He's waiting outside," she continued. "That's weird. Who would come here to see me?" Stefan excused himself and stepped outside. He froze as he saw Joseph, another administrative clerk from Sofia. "Joseph, how'd you know where I was? Is something wrong?" Joseph was a short, balding man in his early 40s. He had served in the Bulgarian army from the late 1890s until about 5 years ago. "Depends on who you ask." "We've declared war." Stefan stood in shock. "On who?" "Serbia." Joseph's face became more somber. "You have to come back to Sofia with me. There's a lot of work to do." Stefan looked at him curiously. "Are we thinking about conscription?" "Thinking about it? No. They've already done it." It took Stefan less than 15 minutes to pack and say goodbye again to his family. 5 hours later, they were walking into the defense minister's office and getting to work. The defense ministry was a hive of activity, a place where the urgency and anxiety intertwined. Multiple teams operated within its walls, each tasked with a critical aspect of war preparedness, including the conscription process. One team meticulously compiled lists of men who fell within the serving age parameters, while another team, the one Stefan and his colleague Joseph belonged to, was responsible for drafting and sending out the notices. The gravity of their work weighed heavily on them. Each letter represented a life irrevocably altered, a family torn apart. As they settled into their roles, the days stretched into a blur of monotony and tension. For the next 2 weeks, they toiled 12 hours a day, fingers dancing over the keys of their typewriters, their rhythmic clacking a constant reminder of the urgency of their task. The notices flowed from the machines like a relentless tide, each one a summons to duty, a call to arms. It was a tedious and repetitious task, yet it had to be done. Stefan lost count of how many notices he had typed up so far. Each one felt like a weight added to his shoulders, a burden he carried with a mix of pride and dread. He had just returned to his small desk in the corner of the room, the bitter aroma of coffee filling the air, when another administrator approached, placing yet another list of names on his desk. The routine was familiar, almost mechanical, but today an unsettling tension crackled in the air. As he quickly glanced over the names, a sense of disconnection washed over him. It was odd how, no matter how many notices he wrote, he knew none of the men that they were addressed to. They were faceless, mere entries on a list, each one a stranger whose fate he was about to influence. But then, as he scanned the paper, his heart stuttered to a halt. There it was, stark and undeniable. Stefan Dimitriov. His brother's name, right there in black and white. A rush of emotion surged through him, fear, anger, and a profound sense of helplessness. He was to write a notice for his own brother. The reality of the situation crashed over him like a wave threatening to pull him under. How could he possibly draft a notice that would send Petar off to war? The thought of his brother, with his easy smile and carefree laughter, facing the horrors of battle was unbearable. Stefan's hands trembled as he reached for the typewriter, the keys suddenly feeling foreign beneath his fingers. The weight of the task loomed larger than ever, and he felt the walls of the office closing in around him. Each letter he typed now felt like a betrayal, a severing of the bond he shared with Petar. He could almost hear his brother's voice, teasing him about his serious demeanor, and the thought twisted in his gut. With every keystroke, he fought against the rising tide of panic. The letters blurred before his eyes, the words becoming a jumbled mess of anxiety and dread. He had to focus. He had to do his job. But how could he reconcile the duty to his country with the love for his brother? The tension in the room seemed to thicken, the air heavy with the unspoken fears of all the men who would soon receive their notices and the families who would be left behind. Stefan took a deep breath as he finished the notice, his heart pounding in his chest. The words stared back at him, stark and unyielding, each one a reminder of the reality he was trying to escape. He sat there, reading it over and over, as if willing the letters to rearrange themselves into something less painful, something that wouldn't send his brother off to a fate he couldn't bear to imagine. Just then, Joseph rambled over, his demeanor relaxed, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling within Stefan. "I'm ready to go get some lunch. You?" he asked nonchalantly, his voice light, as if they were merely discussing the weather rather than the lives they were irrevocably altering. Stefan's mind raced. He glanced down at the notice for Petar, the name etched into his consciousness like a brand. Instead of placing it in the pile of mail destined to be sent out, he slid it under a stack of papers on his desk, hoping Joseph didn't notice the subtle movement. "Sure, I'm starving," he replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on his lips. After they had eaten lunch, Stefan went back to his small desk. He retrieved the notice and again stared at it. He wondered what to do. He didn't notice that Joseph was nearby. "You keep looking at that one." "Why?" Joseph asked. "It just dawned on me that with every one of these notices, we may be condemning a man to die, that's all." Stefan was startled when Joseph snatched the notice out of his hand. "I saw you hide this when I came to get you for lunch. Who is it?" He put it close to his face so he could read it in the dim light. "Oh." Stefan looked up, ashamed that he was caught questioning his duty. I'm going to send it. I just needed to come to grips with it first. This is your brother. Joseph looked around the room. What do we do? Stefan gave Joseph a confused look. What do you mean? I send that off. As much as I don't want to, I have to. Joseph's demeanor took on a defiant tone. I wouldn't if it was my brother. He was quiet as he spoke. He didn't want others in the room to hear him. Well, he's on the list. I don't have a choice. Joseph's face suddenly brightened. We always have a choice, my friend. Come with me. He started his way out of the room and down an adjacent hallway, stopping when he realized Stefan was not following. You coming? Stefan jumped up. I guess so. Stefan was petrified as Joseph headed towards and then stopped at the defense minister's door. What are you doing? Joseph stood straight up with a confident air. Just follow my lead. And he knocked on the door. A voice boomed from the other side of the thick wooden door. Enter. Joseph turned the knob and walked in. Stefan followed, his body language not showing any of the confidence Joseph's did. Seated behind a large oak desk was Vasil Radoslav, the defense minister of Bulgaria, their superior and the man responsible for the nation's defense. You boys don't look familiar. What are your names? At the question, Joseph's demeanor shifted. The confident air that had carried him moments before faded, leaving him looking somewhat deflated. Sir, I'm Joseph Nikolov, and this is Stefan Dimitriov. Vasil motioned for the boys to sit. Close the door first, please. Stefan watched Joseph take a seat, closed the door, and proceeded to take the seat next to Joseph. The two boys sat in silence as Vasil looked them over. I take it you boys work here. What is it that you do? Vasil inquired. Stefan noticed that Joseph was sweating. Very nervous now. He wondered why. It wasn't his brother that was this close to being sent off to possibly die in France. Sir, we're administrators. Right now our job is to send out conscription notices. Vasil nodded his head. A very important task indeed. How are you coming along with it? Stefan again looked at Joseph. It looked again like a cat had Joseph's tongue. Well, sir, today my younger brother was on my list. The minister's head jerked back in surprise. Is that so? Joseph seemed to find his footing then. Sir, Stefan's family has a farm. His father's old, he cannot work himself. Petar, that's his brother, he's needed there. Vasil sat looking at the boy, seemingly giving the matter some thought. What's the boy's name? Where does he live? Stefan rattled the words out hurriedly. Petar Dimitrov. We have a sunflower farm outside of Koprivets. Vasil's expression changed to one of admiration. Sunflowers are very important at a time of war, you know. If there's a blockade, we'll need the oil from sunflowers for cooking. And we can eat the seeds, and they help the soil, Stefan added. All true, my boy, all true. Vasil sat back in his chair, seemingly amused by the conversation. Or was it the distraction? I'll tell you what. Bring me the list that his name is on. Rip up the notice. Agriculture is an important part of our economy. Besides, your family already has one son serving the government. No need to send another off. Stefan and Joseph looked at each other in astonishment. Yes, sir, and thank you, sir, Stefan said as they got up to leave. Vasil motioned for them to stay seated. Please, stay. I've had my fill of bureaucracy today, and you boys have been a welcome distraction. Would you please be up for a few games of rummy? He produced a deck of cards from his desk drawer. Joseph was the first to sit back down, followed by Stefan. Yes, sir, that sounds like a splendid idea. Stefan felt better about things the next day as he got to the office. He was relieved that his brother would be spared the horrors of war, and his father would be spared from having to work the farm on his own. He felt good. He knew that he owed Joseph a debt of gratitude as well. He stopped by Joseph's little desk. I want to thank you for yesterday. Joseph looked up and smiled. I knew you wouldn't go talk to him on your own. You're right. I wouldn't have. And I wouldn't have spent 3 hours playing rummy either. The two laughed together at the recent memory. Thanks again. I'll see you at lunch. Of course. See you at lunch. It had been 3 months since their rummy session with the defense minister, and in that time Stefan had not only continued writing conscription notices, he also was given the dubious task of writing condolence letters to families all over the country. It felt, at least to him, as if his tasks had come full circle. He was busy writing one such condolence letter when he was approached by another administrator. They were carrying a letter. "Are you Stefan Dimitriov?" the administrator asked. Stefan looked up from his typewriter. "I am." The administrator handed Stefan a letter. "This is for you." Stefan took the letter, and the administrator walked away. He looked at the letter, saw it was from his mother, and set it aside. He would have to read it later, maybe after he arrived home this evening. He took the nice card off the pile and started to write. It was robotic to him now. He rarely even recognized the names as he read and typed simultaneously. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. last name, we regret to inform you that your son, first name, was killed while bravely serving his country. The Crown acknowledges your sacrifice and extends its deepest condolences. Signed, Tsar Ferdinand." He finished the card and put it on the send pile and grabbed the next one. A shiver ran down his spine as he typed. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Dimitrov, we regret to inform you that your son, Petar." Stefan stopped typing. He read over the card frantically. It must be another Petar Dimitrov. He flipped the card over to see the address in which the letter would be sent, and his heart sank. Stefan dropped the card and attempted to stand up. He got dizzy and sat back down. He remembered then the letter from his mother. He opened it and read it. "Dear Stefan, I hope this letter finds you well. We've been busy here on the farm. We're getting ready to harvest, you know. Your father and I have to work harder now that Petar has volunteered and left for the army." Stefan never finished either letter. This has been World War I Stories. Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show wherever you find this podcast, and don't forget to throw us a rating. Join our Facebook community by searching and liking the official World War I Stories page. You can also join me on Blue Sky, where I go by the handle WW1Stories_NEB. World War I Stories is now featured on Rabbit in Red Radio, with new episodes streaming Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. They also have all episodes available on demand. Visit rabbitinredradio.com for this and many other independent podcasts. And last but not least, would you like your name read on the show? Become a producer by contributing to our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I Stories. I am very grateful to everyone who downloads and listens to this show. I'm Henny B. See you next time on World War I Stories.